Dorothy wrote the letter in November of 1972. She wrote it at her kitchen table in Baltimore, on 3 pages of lined notebook paper, in the same handwriting she used to write lesson plans for her 7th grade class. She addressed it to Marvin Gaye, care of Motown Records, Detroit, Michigan. She did not expect a reply. She sent it anyway, because she had been carrying what was in it for 18 months and had run out of other places to put it. No reply came, but the letter was found among Marvin Gaye's personal papers after his death in 1984, tucked inside a folder with no label, with other letters and notes whose contents have never been made public. Someone had kept it. Someone had held on to it for 12 years. Dorothy Reeves was 24 years old in the fall of 1972. She taught 7th grade English at a public school in East Baltimore. Her 2nd year in the classroom, still figuring out the difference between what teacher training prepared you for and what the job actually required. She lived in a 3rd-floor apartment 2 blocks from where she had grown up. She had not left Baltimore except for college, and she had come back from college because her mother was sick and because Baltimore was where she was from, and she had not yet found a reason strong enough to leave. Her brother James had been 20 when he shipped out in 1969. He came back in 1971, in his body, intact in the ways that telegrams measure. What he came back as, though, was not the person who had left. The James who had left Baltimore in 1969 had been loud, funny, a person who filled rooms. The James who came back 18 months later was quieter in a way that was not peace. He sat in rooms. He ate. He answered questions when they were asked. He did not fill anything. Their mother had died while James was overseas. He had not been there. Dorothy had been there, and she had managed the funeral and the paperwork and the arrangements, while also managing a classroom of 31 7th graders and trying to understand how a life could contract so completely in the space of a year. She had not cried at the funeral. She had been too busy holding things together to cry, and then the space for it had closed, and she didn't know how to reopen it. She had heard What's Going On when it came out in 1971. She had bought the album in the spring and played it in her apartment on the turntable she had brought from home when her mother died. She had listened to it many times. She understood what it was, a record about the war, about the cost of it, about the specific texture of what the country had been asking its people to carry. What she had not expected was what it did to something in her that she had not been able to reach. The album didn't fix anything. It didn't bring James back to what he had been. It didn't reconstitute the year she had spent managing things alone while her mother died and her brother was overseas. But it acknowledged those things in a way that made them slightly more bearable to hold. The way a witness is different from a record keeper. The way being seen is different from being documented. She wrote the letter 18 months after first hearing the album, because she had been thinking about what she wanted to say for 18 months, and had finally found the words. She was not asking for anything. She was not asking for a response, not asking to meet him, not sending it with any expectation beyond the act of sending it. She was writing because she had something to say to the person who had made that record, and because the alternative was continuing to carry it without saying it. She wrote about James. She wrote about her mother. She wrote about the classroom and what it was like to teach 7th graders in East Baltimore in 1972. The specific weight of trying to give children something useful about the world when the world was demonstrating its worst. She wrote about the album and what it had done, or tried to do, for the part of her that had been unable to grieve in real time. She wrote, in the third page, the single sentence she had been working toward since the beginning. I don't know if you understand what you made, but I want you to know that it found somebody who needed it too. She sealed it. She addressed it. She walked to the mailbox on the corner at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night and dropped it in. She stood at the mailbox for a moment after, in the November cold, and then walked back to her apartment. No reply came. She did not expect one. She moved on, teaching, eventually finishing a graduate degree, eventually leaving Baltimore for a position in Philadelphia. She did not think about the letter often. It had done what it needed to do by being written and sent. She learned about the contents of Marvin Gaye's papers in the years after his death, not through any official disclosure, but through the gradual accumulation of accounts from people who had been close to him, who mentioned that he had kept certain things, that there was a folder of correspondence he had never discussed publicly. She does not know if her letter was in that folder. She has no way of knowing. What she knows is that she wrote it and sent it, and that the act of sending it resolved something in her that she had not been able to resolve any other way. The record still does what it did. She has heard it hundreds of times in the decades since she bought it in 1972. It still finds, each time, the part of her that the first year of grief had sealed over, still addresses it without demanding anything from it, still says, in the same patient voice it has always used, I know what it's been like. You don't have to explain. November 1972, a kitchen table in East Baltimore. 3 pages of lined notebook paper. A letter written by a 24-year-old woman to a man she had never met, about the only honest thing she knew how to offer in return for the most useful thing anyone had ever given her. She walked to the mailbox at 9 o'clock. She dropped it in. She stood for a moment in the cold. Somewhere in Los Angeles, 12 years later, someone found it. It was still there. It had been kept.